Hello, everybody. Oh, the disco beat has stopped. That's. I'll just sit down then. I'm Marion Thain. I'm Professor of Culture and Technology here at King's, and I'm Director of the Digital Futures Institute, which houses this Living Well with Technology conversation. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But huge thanks to all of you for coming out tonight on a beautiful, cold, crisp evening. It's a great pleasure to have all of you with us who are here in this room, and I know we've got quite a room full of people not too far away joining us through the video link as well, so very, very warm welcome to them too. And as you know, we're going to talk about living well with technology, but particularly living well with AI tonight. And why are we all talking about AI? Well, obviously, it's because it's moved so fast and become so embedded in pretty much every aspect of our lives so quickly. That this is quite a fascinating point to be living through this narrative with technology in. And what we do know is that we don't know half of it. So I think we move around the world and so much around us is conditioned through artificial intelligence. I don't think we know always when we're interacting with things that have come through that route and when they haven't. I did once ask somebody in a call center whether they were a robot, and they because their sort of tone was so bright and even-toned. And she said, "No, of course not. Why do you ask?" In exactly the same way. And I thought, isn't that exactly what a machine would say? Anyway, I still don't know to this day, but it sort of haunts me a little bit, that moment. So we also know that just recently the government's just had its first AI safety summit in Bletchley Park, just in November. And it wasn't so many months ago that a group of global tech leaders came out and called for a pause in the development of AI, not because they were worried that we couldn't code well enough or that we didn't have the technical expertise to keep pushing forward with AI, but because they were concerned that we didn't have the kinds of ethical frameworks, the safeguards, all of the frameworks that we need to ensure that we live well with AI, with technology more broadly. So at King's, we are opening up space for a new kind of conversation about technology, and it's one that brings together the talk about technical innovation with the conversation about ethics, about responsibility, about how we live well. So we're really opposing this yay technology, nay technology binary that we've seen for a long time. We've had our Centers for Existential Risk and the hand-wringing and the doom, the doom merchants, and then we've had the kind of yay technology, techno-optimism, but they've often been held, those conversations have been held in very different camps and very different locations. What we want to do through the King's Digital Futures Institute is bring those together and have a different kind of conversation, one which undoes that binary, one which is neither blind optimism nor naysaying, and think about technology in new ways. The other way in which the Digital Futures Institute at King's is quite distinctive is that it's bringing together researchers from across all of the disciplines to enable us to have a new approach to how we think about technology. So we're starting quite radically interdisciplinary projects where we have philosophers in conversation with people from the health faculties, we have people in creative and cultural areas in conversation with people in law, and we're trying to really bring the conversation together in a new way, which is why we have this wonderful panel of King's experts from across informatics, humanities, medical faculties, and law, to talk a little bit first about their research and what they're doing with AI. And then we're going to have a second panel commenting on these research interventions to think about what effect they might have for policy, how they might be turned into that sort of applicable thinking that our external experts have kindly joined us tonight to talk about. So we're going for a new format of this event, and I think this is going to be a huge amount of fun. So first of all, I'm going to introduce our four King's experts and researchers, and then Michelle is going to come on after that and introduce our external policy panel. So first of all, you'll hear from Professor Carmine Ventre, who's Professor of Computer Science and Director of the Institute of Artificial Intelligence here at King's. Then you'll hear from Professor Joanna Zylinska, who's Professor of Media Philosophy and Critical Digital Practice in our Digital Humanities department here in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at King's. Next up, Professor Seb Ourselin, who is Professor of Healthcare Engineering and Head of School in the School of Biomedical Engineering and Imaging Sciences. And then finally, Professor Dan Hunter, who's Professor of Law and Executive Dean of the Dickson Poon Law School here at King's. So they will run through a series of little TED-style talks in sequence, and then Michelle will join us for the policy panel. Thank you. Pass over to
you. Okay, thanks, Marion. Yeah, I don't know about the TED-style talk. I'll do my best. So when I was asked to think about living well with technology, this is the story that came to mind. And this story comes back to when a bank not far from here came to us with a research project of developing some AI technology to help them improve their risk management strategies. So what we did with them was to create a successful technology that creates high-fidelity mathematical objects that traders can use in their daily operations, reducing the risk and exposure of the bank. Now, you might expect this is a success story. They asked us to come up with an AI tool. We did develop one, and they use it every day in their operation. And actually, that's not the case, because there were two barriers that they could not overcome, and I'll tell you more in a moment about that. So in response, what the bank did with this AI tool was to say, okay, we have this technology. Let's try to use it in a bit at, let's say, 10% of its own capabilities. And what they're doing currently with the technology is they use this tool we've developed, and they use it to do anomaly detection. What this means is that they run the AI tool in parallel with the human traders. When the answer of the AI tool is very different from the answer of the AI trader, this case is flagged up for review. So there is so the AI tool then it becomes accompanies, in a sense, the operation of the humans. And for me, this exemplifies what currently living well with technology means. So what it means for me is to determine the optimal way of using technology in the given constraints that we have in the operating environment of the technology. Now, if we return to the case study that I presented at the beginning, the barrier were two, mainly. One, there was a regulatory barrier in that regulators want humans to be responsible for decisions made by financial institutions. And the second was even a cultural barrier within the bank. AI was distrust. So then this means that when we have these kind of barriers, we need to determine what is the trade-off between accepting these obstacles and try to overcome them. And to find an answer to this question, I think the crucial task we have to solve, in events like this, it's to both find the appropriate regulatory framework and improve the technology in making them more trustworthy in a way that we can benefit from the AI advances and mitigating its risks. That's all I wanted to say for today. Thanks.
Hi, so I represent the arts and humanities. And exploring what it means to live well with technology has, of course, been at the heart of many humanities disciplines, from studying how prehistoric humans have emerged with technologies such as stones used as weapons or as tools and fire, through to asking ethical questions about communication technologies such as the internet or studying biotechnology. So the assumption that humans are technical beings is at the core of my work, including my research into AI. This allows me to move beyond the panic reactions to any new developments that come our way, But I'm also driven by the critical spirit of the humanities, where critical, of course, doesn't mean just criticizing things, but rather means mobilizing critical faculties to probe and poke and see what's kind of happening around us. I focus on the creative aspect of AI and what the latest developments mean for the creative sector, for artists, for all sorts of kind of creators. And I do that with colleagues as part of the Creative AI Lab, which is a collaboration between the Department of Digital Humanities and Serpentine Galleries, where we don't just think about concepts, but also study tools and infrastructures, thinking how we can help artists develop, who maybe haven't trained in kind of AI or in engineering more broadly, to nevertheless start practicing in that area. But I also do it kind of on my own as philosopher and artist. And in 2020, I published a book. It was open access, so it was taken up quite widely in the gallery and circuit. It was called AI Art, Machine Visions and Warped Dreams. So that subtitle tells you about that, hopefully, about that critical spirit of the, again, poking and probing. The key question I was trying to ask is that the question that normally gets asked around AI now with Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and DALL-E is, can machines be creative? Is not the best question we can ask. New Scientist recently pointed out if it is so easy to break down the style of famous artists such as Van Gogh or Brahms or Beethoven and to make replicas through code, maybe what we think of human creativity isn't all that. Maybe it's actually, there is something going on around us being more algorithmic than we realize that we are. Now, this shouldn't really, again, lead us into a situation of panic, I think. They recognize that artists or creators or humans have always created with technology, with external forces. Artists have created in the state of mania, fever. A Polish artist, Witkacy, would put in the corner of his paintings the amount of drugs he took and the kinds of drugs he took. You can think about the camera obscura through centuries as a drawing device that actually became an apparatus for making pictures later on. So there has been that kind of element of co-creation for centuries. Also, the fear around machine learning is not that new either. In the 19th century, when photography was invented, a lot of intellectuals of the day went into a mode of panic, thinking painting is dead. At the same time, we know that painting didn't die, but it had to rethink itself. Then we had surrealism, we had cubism, we had impressionism. So humans had to see ourselves again anew, but also had to see the possibility in the kind of new ways of doing things. Speaking of photography, quick example from my own practice. In 2021, I remade the most famous photo film, which is a 1962 black and white, of course, avant-garde film by French filmmaker Chris Marker called La Jetée, dealing with post-apocalyptic themes in the aftermath of World War III. And I remade it with GPT-2, not Chat, which is like a grandparent of Chat GPT, and through some GAN networks. And it produced a very kind of moody, poetic, but glitchy film. The glitch is what the humanities people are interested in, when you can still see the seams, when the technology hasn't become quite embedded. So moving towards the closing, 2 points. One is that I'm kind of trying to scale some of these ideas up and working on the idea of planetary AI. AI as an environmental problem of resources, human and planetary energy, but also thinking about applying systems theory to large-scale thinking about how AI is going to operate on so many different levels, because we can't do it within one discipline or one group of humans, even one university or one company. The second key takeaway, that arts and humanities scholars, it's worth having us at the table at the design stage. It will save everyone a lot of headache and a lot of money. We won't be just trying to fix things afterwards. Arts and humanities people arrive and say there's bias, there is copyright issues. It's really good to have us co-designing for planetary good while helping to figure out what it means to live a good life. Whose idea of good is it? And more importantly, how do we deal with competing ideas of good when we've got different positions, different nations, different states, different forms of kind of aligning? Thank you.
Oh my word, I'm going to follow that. My talk is going to be very pedestrian, and I'm sorry I've got notes because 5 minutes to fill, no more, I've been told. So I was asked to talk about living well with AI in healthcare, and my subtitle of this was the unfulfilled promise. And I would like to explore briefly with you a very critical aspect of our modern healthcare landscape that everyone is talking about, which is integrating AI into our systems. And while the idea of living well with technology, especially AI in healthcare, is really exciting and captivating, so reality presents a very complex array of challenges that are really yet to be overcome. And today, I will try in 5 minutes, or 4 now, to take you through some of this intricate journey of AI in healthcare, its promises, hurdles, and hopefully the path forward. First, really, in terms of the promise, AI in healthcare has been really a beacon of innovation, but actually, really, up to now, a beacon of hope, mostly. It promises to revolutionize the way we diagnose, the way we treat, the way we manage disease, the way we prognose. And for those sophisticated algorithms to detect cancer more accurately than human eyes, to AI-driven personal treatment plans, the potential is actually huge. And the enthusiasm has been really across the board, especially from politicians. And I'm sure you will remember our Prime Minister, Snook, mentioning specifically more field hospital and the amazing work related to ophthalmology and OCT scanned just before the Global AI Summit, as Global AI Safety Summit. But not only we need to have those models to work well, we need them to be generalizable and safe, but very importantly, unbiased and fair. And bias in models has been a huge issue. It can lead to massive unequal healthcare outcomes, and that's particularly crucial when considering diverse populations. And those algorithms which are trained on very limited data sets can be, or biased data set, can be performing poorly on subgroups. And that can actually be quite often underrepresented groups, leading to misdiagnosis or inappropriate treatments. And we need to address these requirements. We need to create comprehensive data sets, and we need to have a conscious effort in AI in our design to ensure inclusivity and fairness in our healthcare delivery. And one of the biggest challenges of all, really, has been how do you get those technology into clinical practice? And it's certainly one of the most exciting but huge challenge in front of us. And despite their potential, many AI tools, if actually not pretty much all of them, fail to adapt to the chaotic and varied nature of real-world clinical environments. And this gap between theoretical efficacy and practical utility is clearly the biggest and most significant barrier. Bridging it required interdisciplinary efforts, where clinicians, data scientists, and many other disciplines, I would like to highlight one which is really important and quite often omitted, which are ethicists, to collaborate and tailor AI solutions to the nuanced demands of healthcare setting. And equally important is the real-world validation of those algorithms, which quite often is not done properly. And those models must be tested in diverse real-world healthcare settings, not just in controlled research environments. And they need to involve navigating complex regulatory landscapes and conducting extensive multi-site clinical trials to ensure the systems are safe, effective, and reliable across different populations and different settings. And those challenges are not only scientific, they're actually logistical and regulatory. And I would like to just add one point, really, which is really around economics and challenges, which are quite often overlooked as a key barrier. The economic aspect, in particular, is the lack of reimbursement model of AI-driven healthcare, is currently creating a huge hurdle. And without proper reimbursement frameworks, healthcare providers are reluctant to adopt these advances, which are seen as costly and quite often going to save costs rather than to make money to people. And people rather much prefer to spend to get more than to spend less to spend less. Does that make sense? The current healthcare economics models needs to evolve to accommodate and support the integration of AI, and we need to align financial incentives with innovations and care models. And in light of those challenges, it is clear that we are not living well yet with AI in healthcare, and we stand at the cusp of a revolution, yet the reality is that the AI integration in our daily healthcare practice is absolutely minimal. And the hurdles of bias, clinical translation, real-world validation, economic factors are not just speed bump on the roads. They are significant obstacles that we must overcome to truly harness the power of AI in healthcare. And as we look towards the future, we're not trying to be positive now. We envision a healthcare system where AI not only supports but enhances patient care. And this future is attainable, but it requires a concerted effort from all stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem. And researchers are working tirelessly to develop unbiased, robust AI tools. Policymakers and industry leaders are collaborating to create frameworks like the EU AI Act that encourage safe and ethical AI integration. And those efforts, combined with advancement in AI, are paving the way towards a healthcare system that is more efficient, equitable, and effective. And in conclusion, while the journey towards integrating AI in healthcare is fraught with challenges, it is a journey worth embarking on. And the potential of AI to transform healthcare is immense, but realizing this potential requires us to address the challenges head-on. And together, through innovation, collaboration, and ethical practice, we can move towards a future where we live well with AI in our healthcare system. And coming back to my analogy of speed bumps generated by all of those challenges, if AI in healthcare is driving innovation, one should wonder what is the speed limit to live well with it. Thank you.
So I'm Dan Hunter, not Sebastien Ourselin. There we are. So I've been doing AI and law for more than 30 years, and they give me 5 minutes. So I'm not going to talk about law. I'm going to talk about the future of work with AI and living well with AI within work. So 12 years ago, Krzyzewski, Susskind, and Hinton ushered in the beginning of the deep learning era, the machine learning era, what we think of when we think about AI with the AlexNet paper. 7 years ago, Vaswani and others created the transformer architecture, which is the basis of all of the stuff that we think about these days with OpenAI, DALL-E 3, and so on, and especially GPT 3.5 and 3.4. 15 months ago, ChatGPT burst onto the scene. Everyone lost their mind, even though it's not actually a very good model these days, right? And then 9 months ago, March 2023, OpenAI released GPT-4 as ChatGPT+. GPT-4 is an unbelievable advance upon everything that had gone before. Scale actually does matter. Since then, in the last 9 months, 2 other models have been released, one by Google, one by another company, Anthropic, which are comparable to GPT-4. And these models are absolutely extraordinary in their ability to do all sorts of things with language at a level of quality and ability which is significantly better than most human beings, right? I want to make it clear. So for the GRE, which is the graduate record examination to get you into graduate school in the United States, in the verbal level, GPT-4 operates at the 99th percentile, right? That means that it's better than basically every other human being that's applying to graduate school in the United States. The same is true with the LSAT, the same is true with the bar exam, the same is true with lots and lots of areas. This is language, this is not other sorts of reasoning, it's not planning, it's not other things, but it's language, the ability to generate language. It's better than most human beings. And of course we freaked out when we heard that. I was like, what on earth? What do we do with this? This is terrible, it's the end of the world. And then of course the lawyers got involved and they looked and went, oh, it's making hallucinations. It's not as good as me. And so I was just like, what are we to do? It's either the end of the world or actually they're really not important. So I want to just like bracket that and go, that's not living well with AI, right? That's kind of like freaking out and or assuming that it actually can't change the world. So since the release of GPT-4 and these other models, there have been a range of really interesting studies about the way in which human beings can work with these models, right, and use it to improve their lives at work. So the range of these studies have included IT help desk people, more than 5,000 people were engaged in that particular study, law students, business consultants, management consultants at the high end, the highest end, Bain Consulting Group of management consultants. And what was the other one? I'm blanking on it because I should have brought some notes. But in any event, there was another one in, mid-level writing exercises for HR and PR, right, press releases. So these studies are now, it's actually been shown that there are at least 4 things true when human beings use GPT-4 levels of models. The first is that they produce much better quality output, right? Assuming that the question that they've been asked is something which fits within the range of things that these large language models are good at. And when I say better, right, they are 1 standard deviation on average better than they were beforehand. That means that everyone is above average. I want you to think, if you use these models, every one of you will be better than you were before. You will be above average. If you're average, you'll be better than. If you are actually above average, you'll be unbelievably good. Although actually, if you're really, really good, you don't improve that much, turns out. That's a slight wrinkle. The second thing is all of you will be faster. All of you will be much, much faster, right? Between 17 and 30% faster at that particular exercise, right? If you are young or not very good at those sorts of things, you will improve better than those who are older and more experienced and actually really good, right? So it will mean that those people who are the novices, right, or actually who need more help will get more help, right? So you'll improve more if you're actually below average, right, or young or a novice, which is extraordinary, right? Right? The best amongst us are not so good. I've got 20 seconds. I've only got one other observation in relation to that. Not only all of these 3 things will be true, but you'll be happier at your job because you won't have to do the scut work that you don't like doing because GPT-4 will do it for you. I know this to be true even though my boss's boss is sitting in the audience here because I do a lot of my HR-related scut work using GPT-4 because I hate that stuff, right? So you'll be better, stronger, it's like something out of the $6 Million Man, and you'll be happier. So as I say to all of the law firms and all of the consultancies that I talk with about this, if large language models were a drug, everyone would be prescribed it. It's like exercise, right? There is no downside to these things. So if they're ever an example of living well with technology, it's large language models. We should embrace it. Thank you.
Wow, that was incredible. I mean, we're moving at pace. I'm not used to this, this speed, but I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. Michelle Clement. I'm your chair for this second segment of the event. I'm a lecturer at the Strand Group in the Policy Institute at King's, where we examine how government works in practice through teaching, through research, and through events. I'm also a researcher in residence at number 10 Downing Street. I'm a historian, but that fits in with this evening. But in an earlier part of my career, I worked on tech and entrepreneurship, Silicon Roundabout or Tech City, as some of you might be familiar with those terms from sort of 10, 12 years ago out in East London. When I was doing that, I facilitated collaboration between engineers, computer scientists and creatives with central and local government, cultural institutions and entrepreneurs. So again, goes with the theme this evening, although I haven't done that for a while. But back to now. At the Strand Group in the Policy Institute, we recently formed an institutional partnership with the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, DCIT for short. And we're in the process of setting up a Centre for Digital Policy underpinned by a brand new PhD on the history of digital policy, which we just found out we've got funding for, so that's exciting news. And we also convene a forum for policymakers across many policy areas. And our next DCIT event will be in March, but I'll tell you a bit more about that later. Let's now move on to our wider discussion with our invited guests. But before I do that, big thank you to our King's researchers for your incredible talks spanning the whole breadth of AI. But I'm delighted to be joined by our expert panel, James Snook, formerly of DCIT, now Flint Global, on the far right there, but not literally. Jennifer Beroshi from Google DeepMind, and then Dr. Daniel Susskind from the Institute for Ethics in AI at Oxford. Thank you very much for being here. Welcome. Could I ask you each to introduce yourselves in turn, reflect on what you've heard from our King's researchers, and then share your thinking on AI and living well with technology from your own area of expertise? Starting with James.
Brilliant, thank you. Absolute pleasure to be here. As Michelle said, I spent the last 10 years or so of my career working on digital and tech policy in the UK government. I was part of the DCIT senior leadership team that was trying to lead the policy response to that really rapid path of innovation that Dan covered at the end of covered in his remarks. And then I've recently moved to a public affairs company called Flint Global, where I advise companies on how to engage the government in the UK and around the world on these kind of issues. That was an absolutely fascinating series of remarks. It really resonated with how in government we were trying to get to grips with the march of this technology that was not just a tech issue, but was impacting on financial services, was impacting on the creative industries and arts, was impacting on society as a whole. And my experience of working on technology policy over the last 10 years is that is the norm, because technology is not limited to one industry sector or one industry field. It really does change how we operate as a society, changes how we work, it changes our economy. But AI has the potential to do it in spades. The sheer economic, scientific, and humanity-based potential of AI is perhaps of a scale that we've not seen in policymaking, despite the last 30 years and the knowledge-based revolution that has been driven by the internet and IT technology. So I thought it might be helpful, rather than to dive into that absolute complexity of policymaking that is taking place now in every government around the world, to actually step up a level and distill the policy debate about AI, the way in which political decision makers are thinking about AI, into its most simple form. And that really is the examination of two ends of a spectrum. One end of the spectrum is the incredibly positive agenda that Dan set out at the end of his remarks, which is the attraction of the benefits that AI technology will bring to society. A new factor of economic production that can drive growth at a time when growth rates have been depressed globally for a number of years. Giant leaps in scientific research that can provide the solutions to massive societal challenges, whether it is driving improvements of healthcare or whether it is meeting net zero and solving the challenge of climate change. That is the optimism that policy and political decision makers want to be able to realise, to overcome the barriers that Seb and others have set out. They want to do that not just because a rising tide lifts all boats, but they want to see their countries, their economies lead and be the most globally economically competitive. And so that brings me to the other end of the spectrum and what it means to live well with technology as a political decision maker, because the other end of the spectrum is harm and risk. And speakers have rightly sought to downplay some of the more extreme versions of that. I think there is undoubtedly a collective community of experts working on these issues that can see the potential for incredibly serious and significant risks at the frontier of AI capability that are not here yet, but do pose genuine existential or real significant harms. Terrorism, massive increases in capability on issues like cybersecurity, financial instability, or threats to the resilience of critical national infrastructure as artificial intelligence becomes a single point of failure within our economies and societies. Those frontier risks have been the focus of a lot of political debate. That is what the Global AI Safety Summit was all about. And I think there is real hope to take in the fact that jurisdictions around the world have got together across other political divides. Worth bearing in mind that that was a forum where the US and China sat down together in a way they have not done on other issues for a number of years, crossing global divides and other forms of cleavages, say we will work collaboratively on this issue, we will work with industry, with academics and experts. So there is that set of risks on that far end of the spectrum. But there are also then the here and now risks. There is the fact that the adoption of AI and the adoption of technologies that we don't fully know well and don't know how to embed in existing real-world systems might lead to discrimination, misinformation, workforce displacement, online harms. And so the challenge for policymakers, the answer to their question of how do we live well with technology is at what point do we intervene and how far do we intervene in that spectrum to optimally realise the benefits in the same way that companies and others are wishing to do so within the constraints of our societal operating system, which is the amount of harm we are willing to tolerate and the amount of harm we are able to design out. So I appreciate that is an incredibly simple lens or axis on which to look at this issue, but that is the way in which most policymakers are confronting this. And being driven by really basic political instinct of realizing maximal good while acting to manage harm that might threaten public trust. And that will dissolve or fracture into numerous, millions of different policy debates across all of these industries. And so I suppose the question that I'd be really interested to hear the academic panel's views on as we get further into discussion is, given that complexity that I have shied over, given that this is an issue that is about technology, it is about public trust, it is about societal impacts, it is about resource demands, particularly in a carbon-intensive industry. Given it's about real-world implementation and the complexity of that, what community do policymakers need to form around themselves to answer that question of how they live well with technology as policymakers and lawmakers? Thank you.
All right, I guess I'll go next, and thank you again so much for the invitation. So I'm Jen Beroshi, and I'm with Google DeepMind, the AI developer that's based here in London and King's Cross, and we have developed some of the models that you heard referenced in the earlier part of the panel. I have been working in technology policy for about 15 years, and I find that a lot of that work has been in translating across the technical and the policy spheres, and I find that now there's no more interesting place in many ways I feel like I could find myself than trying to do that across AI, given that it is developing so rapidly. And when people ask, well, what is the impact of this technology? In many ways, the answer is an unsatisfying, it depends. It depends on everything. But I do think that there is now this very strong feeling of responsibility at places, certainly like Google DeepMind, that we ought to go and ask ourselves that question. It is part of, again, the normal practice that we should engage in, to go and say, what are the impacts that we can think through? What can we foresee? What can we not foresee? And again, going out and making sure that we are engaging with policy stakeholders and making sure that we help them understand the technology, which is growing incredibly complex and developing incredibly quickly, as you heard the panel mention, and also translating those insights back into organizations like ours. And again, making sure that if you have researchers who are thinking about advancing the state of the art in AI, again, that they have the high stakes that their work means at the top of their mind. Now, some things that I've been reflecting on is that 2023 really was this massive inflection year when it comes to AI policy. It really was the year where you saw everyone become aware of the technology. You had chatbots become this shorthand for what the technology means, but increasingly people are realizing that AI is permeating all of these different areas of our life. And really, what you had all of these different policymaking institutions try to grapple with it. And I think we often confront a meme that governments don't act or that policymakers don't pass laws. And in fact, when it came to AI, somehow AI was the catalyst for people to overcome that. And you saw summits, you saw unlikely negotiators come together at the table. You saw summits, legislation, the EU, the US. You have seen so much action. And in fact, now in 2024, what we have to grapple with is, well, what do we do now, right? Like, how do we actually take all of these big moments and all of these big agreements and actually translate them into work? And so from my perspective, I think that the type of conversation that we're having here today is so valuable because it is exactly the type of interdisciplinary exchange of views that when we discuss this at Google DeepMind, we think this is really where what we have to be doing and where this has to go next. So we have to take all of these big conversations about AI writ large, and then we have to think about what is the technology that we're developing? What capabilities are we building? Capabilities when it comes to doing things like, yes, processing massive amounts of text, but increasingly other types of media too, right? Like processing video, processing audio, right? Like, and turning that into knowledge for people, but really going to experts like you all and saying, we defer to your expertise about the impacts that AI is going to have in all of these different sectors. And the impact will be different, and the different mitigations, the different safeguards that we're going to have to put on that technology are going to look very different, again, depending on the sector, depending on the use case. And then there's a different responsibility that everyone is going to have, again, when we have this discussion, to think about, okay, what are things that we ought to be building, again, from the ground up? But that's going to have its limits. Then there are mechanisms that we should be building so that we can respond to how we're seeing the technology impact all of your different fields and have different people be able to influence that. And there's going to be some really important trade-offs involved in that. And I think this conversation illustrated that in many ways perfectly. So when we think about AI applications, many people say, we cannot trust these technologies because they hallucinate, right? We talk about things like hallucinations. And the hallucinations are the things that are going to make these technologies perhaps risky in a medical context. And the hallucinations are the feature that are going to make them amazing when we talk about them in the creative context, right? So these truly are the two different sides of that coin. So I do think that there are so many incredible questions, again, that now we get to ask ourselves, and we think about how can we, from our vantage point as developers of the technology, help make the technology more legible to people like you, to people like policymakers, again, so that it can be scrutinized appropriately. And then we set these guardrails on it. But there are many other interesting questions where I would love to hear more of your thoughts on, including how can we as people, what are the things that we can do to make better use of them? How can we make sure that we are also, again, increasing our own, in some ways, our own capabilities, like really thinking innovatively, creatively about how we could be most on top of these technologies and truly living well with them. So I love the framing of this panel, and thank you for the invitation.
Well, thank you very much as well for the invitation. Great pleasure to be here this evening. I'm Daniel Susskind. I'm an economist, and my particular interest is the impact of technology, and particularly AI, on work. Every day we hear stories of systems and machines that are taking on tasks and activities, and we heard some examples before, that until recently we thought only human beings alone could ever do. Making medical diagnoses and driving cars, drafting legal contracts and designing buildings, composing music and writing news reports. What does all of this mean for the vast majority of us for whom our job is our main, if not our only, source of income? As I said, I think this is really one of the great challenges of our time, and that's what I set out to explore in my work. I think one of the things that really jumped out in relation to my work in the discussion before was this idea of creativity. And the reason it's so interesting is that if you had asked leading economists thinking about the impact of technology on work, until very recently, tell us a type of task that you think cannot readily be automated. Until very, very recently, they would have said to you, ones that require creativity from human beings. We'll never build a system that can compose a piece of music, that can write a poem, that can tell a joke, that could get anywhere close to what we might call art. And it wasn't just an academic thought either. If you spoke to leading figures in the professions, if you asked an architect, they'd say, well, a machine can never design a beautiful building. If you asked a doctor can never come up with a clever, creative diagnosis and so on. And yet, if we think about the technological developments of the last 12 to 18 months, the sorts of activities that these technologies like ChatGPT are so very good at doing are the ones that we think we use creativity to do. And in my own work, one of the arguments that I make, and it was reflected in the comments before, is that as a profession, economics is probably underestimating the impact of technology in the labor market, in part because their conceptions of what machines can and cannot do is not well anchored in the experiences outside the profession. And I think this relates to a second observation, and you mentioned it before, around the importance of interdisciplinary work. And tonight is a great example of that. Again, if you think about work, it's often said that work isn't just a source of income, but it's also a source of meaning and purpose and direction and fulfillment. And if that's right, then understanding the impact of technology on the labor market isn't just a challenge of understanding what happens if we hollow out the labour market and leave some people without an income, but it's also about understanding what happens if we hollow out that sense of meaning and purpose and fulfillment and direction in people's lives as well. And it's that kind of question that I think only a sort of interdisciplinary setting can really engage with. The final observation I had, which goes right back to the beginning, the framing of thinking about the future in terms of optimism and pessimism is unhelpful. I think it is unhelpful, and I think it's unhelpful when thinking about it from my own point of view, because it suggests we don't have any control over the future. You know, both optimism and pessimism sort of predict that the future is going to be a particular way, and there's not much that we can do about it. And one of the really interesting developments, I think, in the field of economics in the last few years has been a growing awareness of how we can actively shape the direction of technological progress. So in economics, one of the big interests of economists thinking about the impact of technology on work is whether a technology substitutes for a human worker, displacing them from a particular task or activity, or whether it complements them, you know, making people more productive and better at their work, and we heard that reflected in some of the comments before. But the critical realization is that whether a technology is developed to either substitute or complement for a particular worker is not entirely out of our hands as policymakers. So there's recent work done, for instance, looking at the US tax system, and what they found was that the effective tax burden on machines is far lower than the effective tax burden on hiring a worker. You hire a worker, you've got to pay payroll tax and so on. There's a whole world of additional tax complexity involved with hiring a person rather than a machine to do a particular task. And so economists at the moment are saying, well, okay, how can we look at the tax system again and consider how we can change through the tax system particular incentives that business leaders face in that decision whether to adopt a machine that replaces someone or adopt a machine that helps someone. So those are my reflections, and again, such a pleasure to be here, so thank you very much indeed.
Chair's right, so I'll ask one question to James, Jennifer and Daniel. Given your long careers and your experience with previous earlier technological innovation and its integration with both policy and society, could you share a lesson on how technological change can be successfully integrated into society? This is what they do at the end of podcasts, like a practical tip for listeners.
I mean, I'm happy to kick off. I mean, today the conversation about the impact of technology, and I've sort of unhelpfully done this, focuses quite a lot on the impact of technology on work, on what it means for workers. I mean, the reason I was first interested in the impact of technology was actually less to do with what it meant for workers and far more to do with what it meant for consumers. The first book I wrote was called The Future of the Professions, looking at the impact of technology on law, on medicine, on accountancy, on architecture, on a whole bundle of different professions. But the reason we wrote that book in the first place was less to do with what the future of lawyers and the future of doctors and the future of teachers was going to look like, and far more to do with the future of the professions themselves. It was based on a conviction that the traditional professions are creaking, that not enough people have good access to a good education. They don't have access to a good healthcare system. They don't know what their legal entitlements are. They don't know how to manage their financial affairs. And so the promise of technology, looked at from the point of view of consumers and clients and recipients and patients of the professions, was a sort of liberation of the kind of expertise that has previously only been available to a very privileged and a lucky few. So I suppose one way to think about technology in a more optimistic way and to see it more successfully deployed in society is to put aside some of the concerns and anxieties about what it means for traditional producers and instead focus more on what it means for traditional consumers.
Liberation. James, Jennifer, would you like to?
Yeah, one thought that I'd offer is that I think, and again, I've been in the tech sector for 15 years, so I have a measure of, I am a tech optimist. I'm fairly optimistic about the impact. But I think that while we can expect many good things about the diffusion of technology and more people having access to the technology, I do think it is always good to ask ourselves this question of what do we want to use it for and to what degree do we need it? And it is all right for us to have an answer that is different in terms of the pace of the adoption, again, the speed with which we want to see this technology really being present in parts of our life, depending on those different uses. Again, I think it is completely fine for us to have an answer that modulates that and says, again, there are certain uses of AI, again, that we really want to dive into. And again, it's exciting and we go and we experiment quickly. And there are some other ones where again, I think it's okay to say, right, like, let's take that a little bit slower, right? Like, let's be a little bit more cautious. And I think what we really have to think about with AI is that there are all of these different factors. The speed of the development of the capabilities is so rapid that really the question is, how do you operate with that uncertainty? How do we operate within uncertainty? And we make decisions in uncertainty, again, by being a little bit, again, thoughtful and cautious. And so I think that it is completely fine that we will decide that there are some areas where, again, like, that's not yet an appropriate use. Let's take a little bit more time. Or again, like, let's do something in a way where you can, again, try to apply the technology and then roll it back. Again, whereas there are some other areas where you may want to just say, again, like, let's be more gung-ho. And so I think that, again, that's one way that I would answer that question, is just, it is all right for us to have that complex and more modular approach to integrating technology within our lives.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting question. And I might build on Jen's points a bit and talk about the proof we have of the capacity of the state to respond to this. Because I think there's a truism, and it absolutely has some truth to it, that policy, and particularly law, always lags behind technology. But my introduction to King's was creating this partnership with DCIT, this really beneficial relationship, examining the development of digital policy in the UK, digital policy capability in the UK government. And the first event we did was delivered by the then Digital Department Permanent Secretary, Sarah Healy. And I wrote that speech for her. And it was a fascinating time looking at how the UK government had built a digital and tech policy capability in about 15 years. And the speech was a little pessimistic, and we pointed to technological trends and the emergence of these massive tech companies across that period, and perhaps painted a picture of the state lagging behind. But 15 years to build a policy capability that has then resulted in new laws on online safety, very soon new laws around digital competition, a global policy capability responding to the threat of cybersecurity. That's actually quite a short time horizon, especially when you compare it, as the speech did, to the time it took the then government to respond to the Industrial Revolution, where the policy response played out over about 150 years. We've got a bit more productive. We've narrowed it down. And so I'm really quite optimistic about the ability of states, the UK and globally, to respond to this rapid march of technology and the rapid march of AI capability. But I think the really interesting challenge within it is the one Jen brought out, which is the unpredictability. And whether a 15-year horizon, whether a one-year horizon is going to be enough in the face of those quite prodigious leaps of capability that AI is proving itself capable of making, or rather, the people creating AI technology have proved themselves capable of delivering.
Brilliant, thank you. Before we move on to the reception, where there'll be lots more opportunities for discussion, we thought we'd ask the audience for a few questions to pose to our panel. We've got roving mics on hand, there, and there. I'll take a few questions at once. Please can you share your name, affiliation, and ask a succinct question, please. If we got hands up, please. Yeah, great. You can go first, yeah.
Hello? Okay, good. My name is Leon Samuel. I'm alumni from King's College. I think I was chairman of the Biochemistry Society at King's College. I'm delighted to be here today. It's interesting that we have a panel of professors. If I can remember correctly, computer science, media, healthcare, and law, all of which are being disrupted by artificial intelligence. On the one hand, coding becomes easy for everyone to do. On the other hand, I don't need an actor or an actress. I can build it myself. I could do diagnosis myself. I'm in healthcare, and Alan and Overy and others stealing the march on, I'll just argue amongst ourselves and come up with a probability for a solution. It's interesting that the panel also have someone from the UK government, from Mustafa's DeepMind, and also from, I guess, Peter Morgan at Oxford University, talking about AI and how we can deal with things. Do you think that living well with technology, that and this is for the panel of professors, the unintended consequence is that human-to-human contact, face-to-face, is going to become more and more important? So from the idea of I'm watching my iPad, I'm on my iPhone, the real interactions, the unintended consequence is that living well is the human-to-human interaction, and that's going to increase, is my question for the panel.
I'll take a couple more questions before we have answers. Any women, please? Yep, just there.
It's unfair, but
It's not.
I'll take the opportunity. So one of the things Daniel said was that the consumer focus and how great this is, that consumers can access and consumers can get better legal redress, access to education. But 20, 30 years ago, we said that about the internet. What a wonderful world of information we all have access to. What do we use our phones for now? Cat videos and etc. Who is building that is absolutely consumer focused? And is there an imbalance already in the investment in AI tools that are actually driven by by industries who are suckering more money out of us and so on? And I know that's quite a negative approach to it, but it's that echo of what we all said about the internet. Have we actually used the technology for people and for citizens? And you know, are we strong enough in the sort of state approach to that we are ensuring that that we can get that balance right?
Thank you. One more question, please, for this. Yep.
Hi, Seb Janner. I'm a clinical scientist at Guy's and St Thomas. So I work in nuclear medicine physics, so we use radioactive drugs to diagnose and treat disease. And it's a highly regulated field, partially because, obviously, when you say the word nuclear, people think of Chernobyl, they think of the atom bombs, things like this. So with all of the kind of massive risks, like from frontier AI, all the kinds of stuff that sort of James mentioned extensively, how do we respond if something like that happens, or rather when it happens, when AI causes some kind of cataclysm in that way, or a huge problem? How do we respond in such a way that we don't end up over-regulating it and strangling it in its cradle?
Great question. So we've had first question about human-to-human connection being lost, potentially the consumer focus, I think the motive behind investment, and then your question has just disappeared from my mind, but it was essentially about... Yes. Who wants to... We don't need... You can respond. We probably won't get through 7 individual answers for each. Yep. Joanna, you've got the roving mic there. Thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted to start from the nuclear and then go to the human. Interestingly, around kind of these kind of panic moments around AI, that AI is going to finish us off, we already have a technology that is capable of doing that. We already have nuclear technology in great amounts that, you know, and humans are quite glitchy as well. Humans do all sorts of things. Humans hallucinate, humans and kind of enact all sorts of irrational behaviors. And there's a reason why Oppenheimer was so popular last year, not only because it was coupled with Barbie, but also because it spoke to those fears and anxieties. And of course, we've regulated that particular industry. But when it comes to a technology that can potentially annihilate us, we already have that. So in a way, some of the fears around AI are perhaps misplaced, as in It's not to say that that technology couldn't also add another layer of potential existential threat, but I think that there are some more immediate threats there. And that brings me to that kind of question around the humans. I think the relationship between humans is probably going to become more and more a privilege, in the sense that given the wider context of kind of inequality within which some of the developments are happening, I think the relationship, be it on the labor market, in terms of the universities who will have a face-to-face education, who will be able to see their doctor face-to-face, who will speak to their banker or be able to go and get a kind of customized care, support, or any other type of relationship, be it a relationship with other humans on a kind of intimacy level or on other levels. I think this is becoming kind of privilege. So maybe this is one of the key issues around living well with technology. How do we ensure that with this kind of constant automation of ourselves and every aspect of our life, we don't turn those relationships into a kind of unit commodity points, and we can also ensure that they are not just perceived in terms of kind of privileged relationships that are only staying there, available for the very few.
Great. Any more response from our professors?
Oh, I can say a lot, but I'll leave
Yeah.
that.
Yes, Jennifer.
Sure, I'll offer some thoughts that touch on a couple of the questions. I think your question touches on how do we build a society that is both prepared and is resilient. And you want to be prepared because you want to be thinking ahead to those potential accidents, right? And we want to do whatever we can so that we avoid them, right? So that's where you want to be proactive and think ahead. But then you also want to be ready for that eventuality when you mentioned, what if something does happen? And this is where the resilience comes in. This is why I am very grateful for the fact that we are having these conversations, and the AI Safety Summit here in the UK was one venue to really catalyze these conversations around, again, talk about the risks concretely, and talk about them, again, not because they're immediate, right, and not because they're here now, but it's because you want to start engaging in that exercise, again, where you're operating in a very uncertain situation. How can you prepare, and how can you enable a proportionate policy framework? So again, a framework that is well designed so that, again, if something bad happens, and you will likely have some bad thing happen in society, it doesn't, again, the response that it draws is proportionate. So people don't overreact and say, I would have never thought that this was possible, let's shut down, all of this technology, right? But instead you have frameworks that are well tailored, again, to remedy that. And again, there's a whole spectrum of harms, and I think James mentioned this again very well. It's from near term to longer term. That's a spectrum, and you want to have interventions and policy frameworks that are designed to tackle each of those. And of course, what we want to certainly avoid is you want to avoid anything that is on the, again, larger scale catastrophic end. But you also should expect, again, you will need to have many ways to remedy a lot of other smaller failures of AI in society, because we have many other technologies that fail us, right? And so how do we respond to that? And to me, this touches on the other question that you asked first about, again, what do we do with technology in our lives? I think that people use technology for many frivolous purposes, and you will, again, not be surprised to hear me say this, but we also do use our phones and the internet, for many incredible purposes that sometimes it is easy to take for granted, right? And we're using them for incredible applications. And what I hope that we'll be able to do with AI, certainly to a large degree, is to draw on the lessons that, again, we have learned from seeing how the internet has developed, and also, again, drawing on the state capacity in many ways that has already been built, to deal with a lot of other areas of digital policy, right? And we really think about, okay, we have learned that. How do we really make sure that we're, putting a thumb on the scale of deliberately pro-social uses of the technology, public interest fulfilling uses of the technology, alongside, again, what will surely be a natural, many other natural, trivial, entertainment-oriented, time-killing uses of the technology as well.
Yep, James.
Dan, you go first.
Thank you. So I'm in agreement with you and about the risks. I'm very careful when I talk about the use of these technologies from the consumer point of view to talk about the promise of these technologies. And one of the fears that I have, and one of the fears that I write about a lot in my work, is that the risk, and there are resemblances with what's happened with previous technologies like the internet, the risk is that we replace one traditional set of gatekeepers, traditional law firms, traditional accountancy firms, traditional providers of medical advice, and so on, with a new set of gatekeepers, a new set of technology companies, a new set of internet service providers, whatever it might be, and that we lose the promise of liberating this expertise. So we are in closer agreement than you might think on that. On the point about the human interaction and whether it becomes more or less important, I think this is fascinating, and it is now, just to come back to the comment about creativity, many people have retreated from saying, machine will never do anything that requires creativity, to saying something like, well, a machine can never do the sort of thing that human beings do when they interact face to face. And I think this is very interesting. And what I'm about to say is in no way to sort of suggest that human empathy or the personal touch or anything like that is not valuable and important. I think it is. But I think in the world of work, it's often wildly overstated. Let me give you an example. I was once talking to a group of accountants, and at one point, a particularly boisterous accountant stood up and said, look, Daniel, you don't understand. What my clients want is the personal touch. They want to look me face to face. They want to look me in the eye. They want that human interaction. And I said to them, that isn't really what your clients want. What they want is for their taxes to be done efficiently and effectively. And if they can find a more affordable and effective way of doing it, then they're probably going to go with that instead. The point being that I think in many cases in the world of work, we often confuse the traditional way in which we solve problems, namely through human interaction, with the problem itself. And I think what technology is doing more and more across the working world is forcing us to ask, well, is it the human interaction that we really value here? Or is human interaction just been some means to an end traditionally? And I think in the world of the professions, in the world of white-collar work, I think many people have been surprised at areas where actually it turns out human interaction wasn't really deep down the thing that people were really valuing.
Those were really, really interesting points. I was going to speak to the point about overreaction, and I agree with Jen entirely. Provided you have a sound governance system in place that allows you to interrogate what went wrong and conclude was it a mistake that can be rectified in future, then you've probably got a route to managing overreaction. But I think the risk to that, and perhaps something we haven't examined very much in this discussion yet, is the question of public trust in a technology they don't understand. Because a shock can lead to a significant loss of public trust, and a significant loss of public trust can lead to a refusal to engage with technology. We can bring it back to nuclear, because there is an argument that can be put forward that we would be deploying more nuclear technology, and as a result producing less carbon and making the transition to net zero a lot easier if there were more public trust in that technology. But in many countries and many jurisdictions, it isn't there. There are other reasons, of course, as well. So I think one of the things that companies, politicians, societies as a whole will need to think about, if AI really does have the impact that at the most optimistic end of the spectrum we're talking about, they will need to think about how they sustain public trust in that technology. To mitigate the risk of shock. And that brings me to your question. And I'm a child of the internet. I was, I think, 12 when I got dial-up at home. I can't imagine a life without the internet. I certainly think it has improved my life, but maybe I'm just odd. But on AI, there is a genuine question around, for again, policymakers, as to how to ensure societies benefit from some of its most cutting-edge capabilities. It is incredibly costly in terms of money, energy infrastructure, compute capacity, and the chips that service that, to use AI at its most extreme potential. And as part of building public trust, policymakers and government are probably going to have to work out the answer to the question of how do their populations benefit from that most extreme end? How do they ensure it's not just commercialized and made to produce profits? And we're seeing really interesting steps in this from industry, Google and others who are donating compute capacity in support of scientific research and others. But one of the things that we might see as a result of AI's impact on our economies and societies is the creation of a new type of public service, which is the deployment of AI against societal goals. And there has been some interesting movement in this direction in Europe and elsewhere, trying to build that capability. But I think it is a really, really interesting question. I think to have trust, you have to have some kind of return to the individual and return to the population.
Great, thank you very much. We'll now wrap up this part of the event, but it's clear we've only scratched the surface. Huge thank you to James, to Jennifer and to Daniel and to our fantastic King's researchers. Our next event will be on 6th of March, where we'll be joined by the Permanent Secretary of DCIT, Sarah Mumby, to discuss policy making for the age of AI. So do sign up if you're interested. I'd now like to hand over to our Vice-Chancellor and President of King's, Professor Shitij Kapur, for the closing remarks. Thank you.
Well, what a privilege it is to be here. And it's a privilege in two ways. It's a privilege to be in the presence of scholars who are actively grappling with something that is real. But I genuinely feel it's a privilege to be alive in such a transformative time. Now, I have an interest in the history of science and technology and innovation. So I read about how the previous things have affected humanity. And I'm interested in how the understanding of evolution came about. And it's very interesting, now when we look back, it seems rather simple. But if you look at the debates in 1820s, and by the way, they were going on at King's College London, no one believed in the theory of evolution. We threw out Professor Charles Lyell because we thought he was wrong. And he didn't get a job with any other university. So not only did we think it was wrong, everyone else thought he was wrong. And he was right, because he was the precursor to Darwin, and then came the theory of evolution. But the reason I anchor on that, because it changed our idea as humans of who we are. It fundamentally changed what thing are we? Because prior to that, we were some manifestation of the divine, which started in 4000 BC if you were Christian, earlier if you were not, but nonetheless, it was a very, very clear trajectory, and you knew who you were, and this dangerous idea threw it all apart. It sort of brought it back to biology, linked you to monkeys in a way you didn't like. It changed an idea who you are. And then, of course, I'm very interested in the Industrial Revolution and how it came about, because it changed our work dramatically. And I think AI has the potential to do both. But things will be different this time. They'll be different in pace and ubiquity. Depending upon where you date the Industrial Revolution, 1780, some people would say, it didn't really start changing people's lives till about 1820, 1830, unless you were in Manchester or somewhere right next to where the spinning jenny came. It actually did spread, now looks fast, but by those standards, very slowly. So it took anywhere 40 to 60 years for the first generation of the Industrial Revolution to come. You might even take things faster. Take the electricity. When it came around, electrics, the generating stations, 1880, most factories did not change till 1920. 40 years. What that meant was 2 generations. ChatGPT, you remind me, 15 months. And it's on half the phones here, and if it isn't, I would recommend you get it, if nothing else, to play with it. So I think the first thing that'll be different is pace. But the other thing which I find very interesting is those technologies were very hierarchical. The rich and a very small sector of people around them, driven by capital, got them first. They got to disseminate them in the way they liked, and the common man or woman, sadly not the woman, but common man, had no access to them till much, much longer, and largely became the subject of that technology, rather than in any way feeding into the co-creation of it. So if you ask yourself, the spinning jennies came, who were the people who installed them? The rich capitalists who owned those companies, and it spread from there. It wasn't the weaver or the weaver's children who actually got access to them in any way that they could use them. It's inconceivable. This time it's different. This time, I realize all the, of course, there are 4 companies in the world who control it, but what is different is even if you go, no, but I'll tell you why that is different this time. Is yes, Apple controlled the smartphone and iPhone, but what it led to. Our lives have changed not that much because Steve Jobs came up with that iPhone. Our lives are changed because of the apps that came. And you can already see that happening. If you go to ChatGPT, you'll see something called Explore GPT, and that's everyone and their mother going around now making these AI apps for you to use. So what really interests me in all of this is that now when they go and ask where this technology, there was a polling done very recently amongst managers all over the world as to how are you incorporating this in your work. And I'll just give you 2 countries, British managers and Indian managers. Take your guess who's already using it more. Indian managers, 60% of the Indian managers claim, it's a claim, I don't know, that they're using it in their daily work, and 30% of the British managers do. Now, I don't know what the level of use of what it is, but that's it. The pace, the ubiquity will be very, very different. This technology is going in the hands of the users in a way that previous technologies did not. But there is a third thing that's different, and that's why we are here. Universities were not a part of either the first wave of the Industrial Revolution or, frankly, even dramatic ideas like evolution. We came into it. We've got great historians now who keep studying it, but we weren't there when this was happening. Civic universities came as a consequence of the first wave of industrialization, when you had to figure out, well, how are we going to get people who are technically qualified to work in these new industries? This is an opportunity for universities to be a part of the creation of it. Not only through the technological experts or sector experts who sit in this part of the panel, but in partnering with the policy experts who will essentially create the landscape in which this technology comes. So what I'm here to assure you is that King's College London will be there. We missed evolution, weren't there for the first wave of the Industrial Revolution, but I will not let this one go because I think we are needed. We cannot just leave this for the city to sort of figure it out or for companies to define it. We will absolutely need them. They will lead in the technology, probably they should. But what is the framework in which they should lead in this technology? And I think they are genuinely interested in seeing how can this be integrated with lives in a way that is better. And the other lesson we will keep in mind is that history of technology is essentially a history of inequity. Even this time, it will be inequitable. But can we make it less inequitable? And I think that has to be our goal. And that is where a university can play a part, and we will. And the way we're beginning to do that is just, of course, getting people like you to come here and talk about this. But our Policy Institute is always at the forefront of it. And within the Policy Institute is the Digital Futures Institute. And I didn't know this, James, that you said that there was a conversation at King's 15 years ago when the PermSec came and talked about digital policy. Couple of years ago.
15 years of developing digital policy capability.
And so it's wonderful now that we have another PermSec who's coming and talking about policy making in the age of AI. So I hope you'll be there for that. Now, having said all of that, the one thing AI still can't do is provide you with a good drink. For that, you have to get up and join us. So look, it'll be a pleasure to welcome you for a reception hereafter, but it is not an accident that we are meeting in this building. This is actually the continuation, in many ways, a culmination of a project we started many months ago. So as you will go up, there is an exhibition which is very much about living well with AI and who's going to look after you in the age of AI. So I'd welcome you up for some nibbles and drinks, but also take the opportunity to visit the exhibition. Marion, will there be people guiding people to where the exhibition is? Well, you can't really miss it. It's in the floor above and the floor above that. But I would welcome you to stay connected with King's. We will reach out to you as we do more of these events. But please do interact with us. And can I thank all the organizers today, but a special shout out to Professor Marion Thain, who's our Dean of Arts and Humanities. This is something that has been very dear to you. And this very idea of living well with technology is something that, Marion, you've fostered within King's and will continue to foster together. So thank you to you. Thank you for everyone who's here. Join us for a drink upstairs. Thank you.